Okay, so today we're diving deep into a couple of sermons that really got me thinking about inclusion and resilience within the Christian faith.
Oh, interesting. Which ones?
We've got Pastor Brandi Paulk's We Are the Champions, delivered at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary, and also Bishop D.E. Paulk speaking at First Unity Spiritual Campus.
Those sound like they might touch on some pretty relevant themes, especially considering the current climate.
Right. I was thinking the same thing, particularly for folks who might be drawn to the ideas of Christian nationalism. These messages seem to offer a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely a need for those voices right now.
Absolutely. So let's start with Pastor Brandi Paulk's sermon, We Are the Champions.
Okay, what's the context there?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting. Bishop D.E. Paulk was away on a father-son trip, so she stepped in to deliver this message.
Oh, wow. So she's kind of taking the reins. What's the overall message?
It's really about inclusion and belonging, especially in light of, some pretty divisive election results. She even brings up her own experiences at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary, talking about how she's always felt safe and included there.
That personal touch is always powerful. It makes these concepts much more relatable.
Exactly. And she connects it back to some recent corporate training she did on DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Oh, interesting. So she's tying in those broader societal conversations.
Yeah, it's like she's saying that these principles aren't just confined to the workplace or the political sphere. They have implications for our faith as well.
It makes sense. A lot of overlap there. Okay, so what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, one that really stood out was this idea of the inclusion progression. It's this roadmap for how we can go from being an ally to an advocate, then a champion, and finally an architect of inclusion.
A roadmap, huh? I like that. So how does that work?
She uses this great analogy of a community garden. The ally is like a visitor who appreciates the garden, but isn't really involved in its upkeep. Then you have the advocate, who's like an active gardener, contributing to the garden's growth.
Okay, I see where this is going. What about the champion and the architect?
The champion takes on more of a leadership role, inspiring others to get involved. And finally, the architect is thinking long-term about sustainability and creating a lasting legacy of inclusion.
That's a really powerful framework. It makes you think about your own level of engagement, where you fall on that spectrum.
Right, and it's not about shaming anyone. It's about encouraging us all to move towards deeper levels of commitment to inclusion.
And how does she connect this back to the Christian faith specifically?
Well, she actually brings up the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Ah, classic. What's the connection there?
It's about challenging us to think about what true religion is about. Is it about self-preservation, only caring for those within our own group? Or is it about extending that compassion to everyone, even those we might consider outsiders?
That's a powerful question, and one that's especially relevant in the context of the current social and political landscape.
Absolutely. She even directly addresses the issue of Christian nationalism, saying that it has no place in America or in connection to Jesus Christ.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but I think it speaks to her commitment to a more inclusive and expansive vision of Christianity.
So what other key takeaways stood out to you?
Well, she also talked about the importance of staying open and agile. She actually borrowed this concept from project management methodologies, but I think it applies really well to the work of inclusion. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and that we need to be willing to adapt our approach as we learn and grow. It's about embracing feedback and course correcting along the way.
That makes a lot of sense. We're constantly learning and evolving, so our approaches to inclusion need to evolve as well.
Right, it's a journey, not a destination. And she ends by reminding listeners that we can all be instruments of peace and change, that inclusion really starts with each individual.
It's a hopeful message. It's about empowering individuals to make a difference, even in small ways.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears and explore Bishop D.E. Paulk's perspective on inclusion. He delivered this really thought-provoking sermon at First Unity Spiritual Campus, speaking to a congregation described as a beautiful group of awakening beings.
Oh, that's intriguing. Sounds like a very receptive audience.
Right. He starts by talking about how true peace and fulfillment come from within. They're not dictated by external circumstances. He even says, the world did not give it, and the world cannot take it away.
It's a reminder that our sense of well-being shouldn't be dependent on things outside of ourselves.
Exactly. And then he makes this really interesting distinction between religion and spirituality.
How does he differentiate between the two?
He says that religion dictates what to think, while spirituality teaches how to think.
That's a powerful distinction. It's about encouraging people to engage critically with their faith, not just blindly accept what they're told.
Right, and it ties back to that idea of personal transformation.
Yeah.
It's about taking ownership of our own beliefs and developing our own capacity for discernment.
So he's encouraging people to think for themselves, to question things, to really grapple with their faith.
Absolutely. And he even challenges the traditional emphasis on being right, encouraging listeners to focus on what brings them peace, joy, and personal growth.
So it's not about winning theological debates, it's about finding what nourishes your soul.
Exactly. He even says, "Is it working for me?"
Wow, even referencing his own expertise in biblical scholarship. He's really pushing people to go beyond just intellectual knowledge and find what truly resonates with them.
And then he introduces this fascinating concept of divine creativity, explaining how we create consciously, subconsciously, and unconsciously through our thoughts and actions.
That's a big one. He's saying we have the power to shape our reality.
It is a lot to unpack. He also explores this interplay between individual consciousness and collective consciousness, acknowledging that our personal choices impact the whole and the choices of others impact us.
It's a complex concept, but a crucial one to consider, especially in a world that feels so interconnected.
Right. And then he brings up this powerful analogy of being a bridge over troubled water in times of social and political division.
Oh, I like that. Bridges instead of walls. What does he mean by that?
It's about finding ways to connect with those who hold different beliefs, to build understanding rather than perpetuating division. He uses the analogy of a storm bringing both debris and new opportunities to the shore.
It's a beautiful metaphor for the challenges and opportunities we face in our current social and political climate. There's a lot of turmoil, but there's also potential for growth and transformation.
Yeah, he reminds the listeners that where you are is not who you are, emphasizing the potential for growth and change. He even shares some personal anecdotes, like a funny story about his wife, Pastor Brandi, finally agreeing to preach.
Oh, I love those little glimpses into their relationship. It makes them both seem more human, more relatable.
Me too. He also talks about the importance of patience and understanding, especially for those who are deconstructing their faith or exploring new spiritual paths. He uses this analogy of a cat. Some may scratch, while others are simply curious and seeking connection.
So it's about meeting people where they are, with compassion and understanding.
Yes, and he urges listeners to start looking for cracks in somebody else's portal, acknowledging that awakening can happen in stages and through different entry points.
It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own unique path, and that we can support each other's spiritual growth without judgment or pressure.
He also reminds listeners to just be, encouraging them to focus on their own inner vibration and let go of the need to control or change others.
That's so powerful. It's about trusting the process, trusting that each individual is on their own journey.
And he concludes by urging the congregation to prepare for an increase, not in a financial sense, but in the sense of spiritual growth and expansion. He encourages generosity and giving out of gratitude, reminding listeners that blessing flows to me and blessing flows through me.
That's a really beautiful way to end the sermon. It's about shifting our focus from scarcity to abundance and recognizing that we have everything we need to thrive.
Right. He emphasizes that giving should come from a place of joy and gratitude, not from a sense of obligation or fear.
So he's challenging those prosperity gospel ideas, saying that true abundance is about more than just financial wealth.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our values and using our resources to make a positive impact in the world.
It's about recognizing that we are all interconnected and that when we give freely and joyfully, we not only support others, but we also create a more harmonious flow of energy in our own lives.
He even shared his personal experience of moving away from fear-based giving and towards giving out of gratitude. He talked about how he no longer gives out of a sense of obligation, but because he recognizes that blessing flows to me and blessing flows through me.
That's really inspiring. It shows that it's possible to shift our mindset from scarcity to abundance and to experience the joy and fulfillment that comes with giving freely.
He also reassures the congregation that they don't need to resort to manipulative tactics or fear-based messaging to ensure financial solvency.
That's a powerful message, especially for those who may have come from faith backgrounds that emphasize scarcity or a transactional view of faith.
Right. He's basically saying that a thriving spiritual community can be built on love, gratitude, and generosity, rather than fear, guilt, and manipulation.
So he's offering a different model, a different way of being in community.
Exactly. And he concludes by acknowledging that there will be challenges ahead, comparing the current social and political climate to a storm that washes both debris and new opportunities onto the shore.
It's a really powerful image that captures both the destructive and creative potential of the times we are living in.
Right. There's a lot of turmoil and upheaval, but there's also potential for profound growth and transformation.
It's like he's saying that we need to be prepared for the storm, but also to be open to the new possibilities that it might bring.
He urges First Unity Spiritual Campus to be prepared for this influx of new seekers who might be arriving with a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and maybe even some baggage from their previous religious experiences.
It's a call to be compassionate and patient, to recognize that those who are new to this path may not always say or do the right thing.
Right, but their presence is a sign of the growing hunger for a more inclusive and spiritually fulfilling way of life.
So it's a challenge, but also a really hopeful sign.
He ends by expressing his confidence in First Unity Spiritual Campus's ability to navigate these challenges and emerge as a beacon of hope and inclusion in a world that desperately needs it.
That's a beautiful message of hope and encouragement.
So as you can see, both Pastor Brandi Paulk and Bishop D.E. Paulk offer profound insights into the power of inclusion and resilience, particularly for those within the Christian faith who are wrestling with the rigid confines of Christian nationalism.
Their messages challenge us to move beyond fear, judgment, and exclusion. They invite us to embrace a more expansive and compassionate vision of faith, one that celebrates diversity, encourages critical thinking, and prioritizes personal spiritual growth.
They remind us that we have the power to create a more inclusive and loving world, starting with our own thoughts, actions, and interactions with others.
And they offer hope that even amidst the current turmoil, there is a growing movement of people who are awakening to this more compassionate and inclusive way of being.
They remind us that we are not alone on this journey. We are part of a vibrant and growing community of awakening beings who are committed to creating a world where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to live their truth.
Their words offer a powerful antidote to the fear, division, and exclusion that are so prevalent in our world today. They invite us to step into our roles as champions of inclusion and to build bridges of understanding and compassion, one heart at a time.
So there you have it, two compelling perspectives on inclusion and resilience that challenge us to think differently about faith, community, and our role in creating a more compassionate world. But what does this all mean for you?
That's a great question. What resonated with you the most from these sermons?
We've heard about personal journeys, powerful analogies, and practical advice for building bridges of understanding. But the question remains, what role will you play in creating a more inclusive and compassionate world?
Will you be the curious ally, the active advocate, the inspiring champion, or perhaps even the visionary architect?
Think about that, and maybe even explore some of these ideas with someone who sees the world a little differently than you do. You know, I was thinking about that inclusion progression, that roadmap from ally to architect, really resonated with me, but, it makes you wonder how you actually put it into practice.
It does, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to understand those stages, but how do we actually embody them in our daily lives?
It's almost like, okay, I get it, inclusion is important, but what does that look like day to day? How do I make sure I'm not just, talking the talk, but actually walking the walk?
Yeah, it has to be more than just a theoretical concept.
Exactly. And that's where I think Pastor Paulk's message about moving from I bet to I wonder comes in. She talked about how that simple shift in language can make a huge difference in how we approach those conversations with people who hold different beliefs.
Oh, I remember that. It's about replacing those assumptions and judgments with genuine curiosity.
Right. Like instead of saying, I bet you believe this because of that, you say, I wonder what led you to that perspective.
It opens up a space for dialogue, for understanding, for maybe even changing our own minds.
Yeah, it's about approaching those conversations with humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
Which is something Bishop Paulk also emphasized. Remember when he talked about the difference between religion, dictating what to think, and spirituality, teaching how to view to think?
Right. It's like he's giving us permission to question, to doubt, to really wrestle with these big ideas.
It's about engaging with our faith critically, not just blindly accepting what we're told.
And he even challenged that whole emphasis on being right all the time. He encouraged people to prioritize personal growth and what resonates with them personally, even if it goes against conventional wisdom or what they were taught growing up.
It takes a lot of courage to question those deeply ingrained beliefs, those things we've always held to be true.
And I think that's where the idea of resilience comes in. Because facing those uncomfortable truths, being willing to challenge your own assumptions, it can be really tough.
Absolutely. It can be unsettling, even disorienting. But I think there's a certain strength that comes from that willingness to be open, to be vulnerable, to say, hey, I might not have this all figured out.
And it's about recognizing that growth is often messy and uncomfortable. It's not always a linear path.
It's like that analogy Bishop Paulk used, the storm washing debris and new opportunities onto the shore. There's going to be some chaos, some destruction, but there's also the potential for something new and beautiful to emerge.
That makes me think about something else Pastor Paulk said about embracing change. She actually quoted someone else saying, "We are at the culmination of thousands of years of expanding consciousness."
Wow, that's a big statement.
It is, but it's also really hopeful, right? It suggests that we're on the cusp of something truly transformative, a shift in consciousness that could lead to a more inclusive and compassionate world.
But it also acknowledges that this process of expanding consciousness isn't always easy. There's going to be resistance, there's going to be pushback.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where the idea of being a bridge over troubled water comes in. Bishop Paulk really emphasized that, especially in the context of the current political climate.
Right. It's about finding ways to connect with those who might hold different beliefs, different political views. It's about building understanding rather than perpetuating division.
And it's not about compromising our values or pretending that those differences don't exist. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, even in the midst of disagreement.
It's about being willing to listen, to empathize, to see the world from another person's perspective.
And that takes a lot of courage, especially when it feels like the world is becoming more and more polarized.
But I think that's precisely why it's so important. We need those bridge builders now more than ever.
And both of these sermons really emphasize that it starts with each individual. We all have the power to make a difference, to create a more inclusive and compassionate world.
Whether it's through those small, everyday interactions or by taking on more visible leadership roles, we can all contribute to this collective effort.
Okay, but I got to bring up something else that Bishop Paulk said, because it really made me laugh, but also kind of think.
Oh, what's that?
He told this story about sleeping on the couch because he insisted on being right in an argument with Pastor Brandi.
Oh, I remember that. That was classic.
It was. But it also shows that even someone as, spiritually evolved as Bishop Paulk still struggles with ego, with wanting to be right, even in his closest relationships.
Yeah, it makes him seem more human, more relatable. We all have those moments where we dig in our heels, even when it might not be the most productive or loving approach.
Totally. And it highlights the importance of humility, of being willing to admit when we're wrong, even if it means sleeping on the couch.
It's a good reminder that we're all works in progress.
Yeah.
And that even as we're striving to embody these principles of inclusion and compassion, we're going to make mistakes.
And that's okay. It's about learning from those mistakes, course correcting, and continuing to move forward on that journey of growth.
And I think that's where that idea of divine creativity comes in. Bishop Paulk talked about how we are constantly creating our reality through our thoughts and actions, both consciously and unconsciously.
It's a powerful concept. It suggests that we have more agency than we often realize.
And that even when we make mistakes, we have the power to learn from them and to create a different outcome next time.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're not just victims of circumstance, but active participants in shaping our experiences.
And that even when things feel chaotic or uncertain, we always have the power to choose how we respond, how we show up in the world.
It's about choosing love over fear, compassion over judgment, connection over isolation.
And it's about remembering that we don't have to do it alone. We are part of a community, a collective of people who are striving to embody those same values.
So even though the world might feel pretty divided right now, there's still hope. There are still people who are committed to creating a more inclusive and compassionate world.
And maybe, just maybe, those people are starting to find each other. Picking up on that idea of hope, I think both Pastor Paulk and Bishop Paulk offered some really practical advice for how we can actually make a difference.
Oh, totally. It wasn't just these big, lofty concepts. They gave us some real tools to work with.
Like, remember when Pastor Paulk talked about the unseen communities? It made me realize how often we focus on the most visible forms of marginalization, and we forget about those who are experiencing exclusion in ways that might not be as obvious.
It's like a reminder to broaden our understanding of inclusion. It's not just about race, gender, or sexual orientation. It's about being sensitive to all the different ways people can feel excluded or marginalized.
And it's about being willing to listen to those stories, even when they're uncomfortable or challenge our assumptions.
It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots and that we can learn so much from those whose experiences are different from our own.
And sometimes that learning process can be messy and uncomfortable. It might involve admitting that we were wrong or that we've unknowingly contributed to someone else's pain.
Which is where that resilience piece comes in, right? It's about being able to sit with that discomfort, to acknowledge the harm that's been done, and to commit to doing better moving forward.
And I think that's where forgiveness plays a role as well. Forgiving ourselves for our past mistakes and also being willing to forgive others who have harmed us.
It's about recognizing that we're all on this journey together and that we're all capable of growth and transformation.
And I loved how Pastor Paulk connected that idea of forgiveness back to the Christian faith. She talked about how Jesus' message was all about radical forgiveness, about extending grace even to those who don't deserve it.
Right. It's about breaking those cycles of retribution and revenge, and instead choosing to respond with love and compassion.
Which, let's be honest, is a lot easier said than done.
Oh, for sure. It takes a lot of courage and intentionality to choose forgiveness, especially when we've been deeply hurt. But I think that's where the divine creativity piece comes in.
How so?
Well, remember how Bishop Paulk talked about how we're constantly creating our reality through our thoughts and actions? It's like we have the power to choose what kind of world we want to live in, what kind of people we want to be.
So instead of getting stuck in those patterns of resentment and anger, we can choose to create something different, something more aligned with our values of compassion and forgiveness.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior or letting people off the hook. It's about recognizing that holding on to anger and resentment ultimately hurts us more than it hurts anyone else.
It's about choosing to free ourselves from those negative emotions so that we can move forward with more lightness and love.
And I think that's ultimately what both of these sermons were about. It's about finding that place of peace and resilience within ourselves so that we can be those beacons of hope and compassion in the world.
Yeah, they gave us a lot to think about, a lot to chew on. I especially appreciated how they challenged us to go beyond just talking about inclusion and to actually put those values into practice in our daily lives.
And to remember that we're not alone in this journey. There's a whole community of people out there who are striving to embody those same principles.
So if you're feeling inspired, if you're feeling called to create a more inclusive and compassionate world, reach out, connect with others who share your values.
Because together, we can make a difference.